G'day everyone. Over the weekend, many of you will have seen reports in the media following an interview given by South Australian Liberal Senator Cory Bernardi. Now, in that interview, Senator Bernardi called for a crackdown on polygamous Muslim people who, in his view, are rorting the Centrelink system. He said, "The lack of will to confront some individuals who seek to apply a different law to themselves means politicians are afraid to speak out." Now, normally when I do these explainers, I try hard to be neutral. However, if I try to explain the law on this issue, there's no escaping the fact that I'm going to be telling you that Senator Bernardi is wrong about the law on pretty much every point. You might agree or not agree with him on the question of the morality of polygamy. I'm not going there. But let's look at the law. In this explainer, I'm going to use the term polyamory rather than polygamy. Polyamory is a wider term that encompasses people who are involved in plural relationships, whether this is for religious reasons or not. Now, first up, there are no polyamorous marriages properly so described in Australia. None. Zilch. Section 5 of the Marriage Act in Australia defines a marriage as the union of a man and a woman, to the exclusion of all others, voluntarily entered into for life. Now, admittedly, that's more of a statement of principle than an actual law. However, if a person is already married and they go through a form of marriage with another person, they commit the criminal offence of bigamy, usually punishable with a maximum of 7 years in prison. Perhaps more realistically, though, because bigamy is not very often charged, Section 23, subsection 1, paragraph A of the Marriage Act says that a marriage is void if either of the parties was, at the time of the marriage, lawfully married to some other person. So in other words, under the law, the second marriage doesn't count. Whether you get charged with bigamy or not, the reality is the second marriage, it can't be registered. Under the law, it doesn't count. So you can't be married twice. Now, what about people who are married overseas in countries where the culture does allow polyamorous marriage? Well, Section 88, capital D, subsection 2, paragraph A, I know that's a mouthful, but that paragraph of the Marriage Act says that only the first of those marriages will be recognised if that family comes to Australia. So nobody in Australia is recognised as being married to more than one person. Now, what about de facto relationships? Here's the funny thing. Under Australian law, you can have as many de facto relationships as you want all at once. You can have 8 if you're a sucker for punishment. Now, de facto relationships are actually defined in a couple of places in our laws, but the clearest expression of this point is found in Section 4, capital A, subsection 5, paragraph C of the Family Law Act 1975. Now, that paragraph says, "For the purposes of this Act, a de facto relationship can exist even if one of the persons is legally married to someone else or in another de facto relationship." Now let's just pause for a moment and just reflect on the fact that these laws apply to everyone. You haven't heard me say anything about these laws applying in some special way to Muslim people. Anyone, Muslim or not, can have as many de facto relationships as they like. Okay, so why does the law say this? Well, it makes sense if you think about it. The most common of these situations comes about when a person is married, not yet divorced, but separated, and they start a de facto relationship with someone else. This happens all the time. Now, these rules also exist so that if, say, a man has 2 separate families, and this does happen, with children in each family, well, neither of the mothers are going to be prevented from seeking family law orders if the relationship breaks down. The family law system is not going to say to her, "Sorry, you were second in the queue, so you don't count and we won't help you." This flexibility in recognising de facto relationships also helps to protect people who might be subject to domestic violence. So there can be no suggestion that violence against a second spouse is somehow not domestic violence because the relationship doesn't count. So you can see there are really good and sensible reasons why people are allowed to have more than one de facto relationship recognised, or a marriage and one or more de facto relationships. Our social convention, of course, is that we generally stick to one. The real issue raised by Senator Bernardi is the suggestion that somehow all of this adds up to a Centrelink route. And if you read the comments sections posted in relation to Senator Bernardi's interviews, there's no doubt that many people have taken the bait. There's really sad comments about Muslim people coming to Australia and flaunting our laws and rorting our Centrelink. Well, I've just shown you that they're not flaunting any laws. Now let me show you they're not rorting Centrelink either. In fact, they're saving the welfare system money. To do this, I want to set up a hypothetical triad or three-party relationship. There's Albert, Bessie and Carleen. They've been together for a while, but Albert and Bessie were together first before Carleen joined them. Albert and Bessie have had one child together, and Albert and Carleen have also had a child. I'll resist the temptation to make up silly names for the kids too. Now, Albert makes a modest $30,000 a year. Bessie also makes $30,000 a year. And Carleen, she's just been made redundant from her job. Now, I've chosen those numbers because they make the example simple, but the principle is the same, regardless of the earnings. Let's start with Senator Bernardi's preferred situation. In this situation, Carleen goes to Centrelink and asks about parenting payment. She explains her relationship, and Centrelink says, well, Senator Bernardi says that you're actually single because your relationship doesn't count. It came second. Now, if Carleen's single, that makes her entitled to the full parenting payment of $738.50 a fortnight. That's our baseline. Now let's look at what actually happens under the current law. First, let's pretend that Albert was maintaining two homes, two separate homes, one that he shared with Bessie and one that he shared with Carleen. Now, in this situation, when Carleen goes to Centrelink and explains her relationship honestly, Centrelink says, well, you're partnered, and your partner's income is $30,000. That reduces your parenting payment, so now you are entitled to $470 a fortnight. That happens even though the full $30,000 is not available for Carleen's household, because some of it is spent in Bessie's. So the current situation saves $268.50 per person per fortnight compared to the Bernardi policy. Finally, let's imagine that all three were sharing a household. In this case, Carleen would be told that both of her partner's incomes would count. In that case, Centrelink would say, unfortunately, Carleen, your partners earn $60,000 a year, so you're not entitled to any parenting payment at all. So that, of course, is a saving of $738.50 per person per fortnight over the Cory Bernardi preferred model. So the bottom line, folks, is that polyamory saves the public purse. So what Cory Bernardi's supporters should be saying is, how dare those Muslims come to Australia and obey the laws and save Centrelink money? I don't know how those Muslims live with themselves. Now, I do feel bad because I've had a bit of a crack at Senator Bernardi. So what I'll say is that if by some miracle of the internet this humble video comes to his attention, I will happily post a link to any right of reply that he would like to make. As ever, folks, these explainers are intended to explain the law, but they are not legal advice. If you're in a polyamorous relationship and are concerned about how the law affects you, please go and see a lawyer who can discuss your particular circumstances. Finally, remember that I'm always looking for new topics for explainers. Please don't hesitate to email me at anthony.marinac@gmail.com.